The morning of the funeral, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Casket, now resting in a shadow box near the dresser. But to steady the ache that had settled there like a stone, my husband of 51 years gone, just like that, no long goodbye, no time to plan. One minute he was telling me to save him a piece of peach cobbler. The next he was gone from a heart attack in the garden. The church was full, neighbors' old army, friends, even the mayor came. Walter had been that kind of man, quiet, dependable, generous in a way that never asked for thanks. A man people noticed when he left the room, but in all that crowd it was Meredith I felt most. Not because of her presence, but because of how little warmth there was in it. My only daughter stood stiff at the pulpit during the eulogy. She read from a piece of paper, her voice flat, rehearsed, professional. When she sat beside me during the service, her hands remained folded neatly in her lap. No comforting touch. I drifted from one room to another like a ghost at my own wake. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window where Walter used to feed the birds every morning. That's when Meredith appeared beside me. Her perfume was sharp, something expensive and cold. She leaned in, her tone so casual it took a moment to register. "You can't just stay here doing nothing," she said, brushing a crumb off the counter. "You'll need to figure things out soon." I turned my head slowly to look at her. "I beg your pardon," she didn't flinch. "I'm just being realistic. There's bills, taxes. It's not 1970 anymore. You can't live like everything will be handed to you." I blinked at her, stunned. My ears buzzed. "Meredith, your father just died." She shrugged. "I know, and now you're a widow. You have to think practically." She walked away before I could respond, smiling politely. At a guest near the foyer, I stood frozen, the words sinking in knot like a knife. After everyone left and the house was finally still, I sat down to order groceries online, just enough for the week. My usual staples: yogurt, fresh berries, a small roast, and Walter's favorite orange marmalade. When I hit checkout, an error popped up. Payment declined. Confused, I tried again. Same thing. I checked our joint account. It was empty. Panic fluttered in my chest. I logged into the backup account Walter had set up for emergencies. Password rejected. I tried his favorite passphrase twice, 3 times. Locked out. I called the bank the next morning. The woman on the line told me, as gently as possible, was now Meredith. I didn't even know she had access. For the first time in my life, I realized what it felt like to be dependent and invisible. Walter had always handled the money. I trusted him. I never had to think about it. He paid the bills, left me some cash for groceries, made sure I had what I needed. I'd never questioned it, never imagined my own daughter would be the first to cut me off. I made a pot of tea and sat alone in the kitchen. The silence pressed against my ribs. There was no grief counseling, no time to sit with the loss, because grief, in Meredith's world, was inefficient. Later that evening, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find a delivery driver holding 2 large bags. It wasn't groceries. Inside were organizational bins, labels, and printed moving checklists. On top was a note in Meredith's handwriting. "Let me know if you need help sorting things." That's when it hit me. She wasn't worried about me. She was clearing space, and she'd already decided I no longer belonged in my own home. It had only been 7 days since Walter's funeral. 7 days since I stood in a cemetery with my hand on his casket and whispered goodbye. And yet, when I stepped into the hallway that morning, I found my life in cardboard boxes, books, blankets, photo frames, all packed neatly and labeled in black marker. Living room, Eleanor, master closet, donate. I stood there staring at them, still in my robe and slippers. I called. She emerged from her office in yoga pants and a crisp blouse. Coffee mug in hand. Calm, controlled. Like this was just another Tuesday. "What is all this?" I asked. She sipped her latte before answering. "You've got a lot of things, and I need to make space." I swallowed hard. Make space? For what? She hesitated, but not with guilt, just calculation. "For the home office. You're not using the master bedroom now." "Not legally. The deed's in Dad's name. You never added yourself." I checked. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Walter wouldn't have, but he did. Or rather, he didn't. And without a will, well, it gets complicated. She shrugged like she was reciting traffic laws. "And if you want to stay, you need to contribute. No savings in your name. It's not fair for me to carry all of this. I've got my own life, Mom. A mortgage, car payments, business expenses. You've had it easy for decades. It's time you stood on your own." The way she said it, like I'd been some spoiled houseguest for half a century. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was there to say? Walter had always managed the money. Not out of control, but because he was good at it. I took care of the home, the meals, Meredith's childhood, his uniforms, the moves every time he got reassigned. That was our balance. I never asked for more, and now it had all been erased. I can't afford to live on my own, I whispered. Meredith tilted her head as if studying a spreadsheet. Well then, you need to find a way to contribute, or find another place to live. That night I went into the attic. There was no insulation, just old trunks and peeling floral wallpaper. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. Walter and I barely had 2 dimes to rub together. 6 months, I remembered rationing food, repairing uniforms. 50s. After years of scrimping and sacrifice, she never asked about the times I worked nights while pregnant, and in her eyes, I had never earned it. The next morning, I opened an old laptop Walter used for crossword puzzles and solitaire. Retail, receptionist, overnight caregiving, shelf stocking. I stared at the listings, heart pounding. I was 74 years old. My back ached when I stood too long. My hands trembled when I held a pen. I hadn't worked a paying job since 1981, but pride wouldn't feed me, and Meredith had made one thing clear. I wasn't welcome here unless I earned my keep. I printed a resume, what little I could remember, and circled 3 job openings at a local library, a grocery store, and a community center. Then I closed the laptop and sat in silence. No more casseroles, no more sympathy cards. Meredith passed me on the stairs without a word. Later, she slid a list under the attic door. Potential job sites, please update me on your progress by the end of the week. There was no love in it, just bullet points. I folded the list and tucked it into the pocket of my coat. She thought she was making me desperate. She didn't realize she was making me dangerous. The janitor's closet smelled like bleach and old wood. I folded my coat, tucked it into the corner, and pulled on the gray smock with the embroidered library crest. Meadowbrook Public Library. Staff. The letters felt too young for me. It wasn't the work I minded. I'd cleaned my own house every day for 50 years. But scrubbing gum from beneath a table while teenagers tossed candy wrappers behind me was different. It wasn't home. It was a job. And at 74, it was a job I couldn't afford to complain about. I worked the evening shift, 3 hours, 5 nights a week. My tasks were simple. Mop the children's area, disinfect keyboards, restock the toilet paper in the bathrooms, vacuum around the reading alcoves. Quiet work, lonely work, but something about it soothed me. I could move slowly, methodically, and no one bothered me. I wasn't mom here. I wasn't the widow. I was just Eleanor, the evening cleaner. The staff didn't talk much, but they were kind. The circulation clerk, Caleb, always nodded when I arrived. Once he even left a coffee thermos on my cart. I drank it sitting on a step stool beside the boiler room, letting the warmth coat the hollowness inside me. It was a strange relief to be invisible on my own terms. At home, my invisibility was weaponized. Meredith had wasted no time filling the void Walter left. I came home one Friday evening to find the living room transformed into a cocktail lounge. White leather chairs, a granite-topped bar cart, string lights dangling from the ceiling. She was hosting a networking event, she said, for her brand. Partners? They drank imported wine and ate catered hors d'oeuvres while I slipped past them in my janitor uniform. No one even asked where I'd been. I watched as Meredith clinked glasses with strangers, laughing in the very room where we'd once celebrated Walter's retirement with carrot cake and soft music. She didn't grieve. She rebranded. One night I passed her open office door and paused. She was on a video call, talking numbers, listing figures. Yes, I liquidated the last account after the death certificate cleared. His pension's still coming in monthly. It'll carry us a bit longer. His pension. My chest went cold. Walter's pension should have been transferred to me. We'd discussed it years ago. He even made arrangements for survivor benefits. I waited until she left the house the next day, then tiptoed into her office and opened the locked filing drawer using a bobby pin. I'd learned to twist back when times were harder and locks were simpler. Inside were folders neatly labeled color-coded. Medical, legal, financial. I flipped through and there it was. Copy of Walter's signature on a revised beneficiary form. His handwriting looked off smoother, slanted differently. I knew his signature. I'd seen it on every birthday card for 50 years. That signature, it wasn't his. It was hers trying to mimic him. I found a notary stamp dated 2 days after his death. He never signed that form, and the will had planned to update it. We'd talked about it the month before he died. He wanted to leave the house to me, his pension untouched. But the final version was missing. Only an older draft remained, one that Meredith had found in his desk after the funeral conveniently. Unsigned, my knees buckled. I sat on the floor of her office, surrounded by documents that proved what I'd begun to suspect. My daughter hadn't just abandoned me emotionally, she had stolen my life. I didn't say a word to her. Instead, the next Evening at work, I lingered in the reference section. The library's computer lab closed at 7 p.m., but the older patrons often needed help, and Caleb was always patient. That night, after he logged out for the evening, I stayed behind under the excuse of wiping down the monitors. I searched for legal aid clinics, elder abuse law, forged documents, pension fraud. The more I read, the more I understood what Meredith had done wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. But confronting her in anger would only backfire. I needed proof, paper, witnesses, process. I spoke quietly to one of the librarians. The following week, an older woman named Mrs. Doherty who wore thick glasses and floral scarves. She'd lost her husband 2 years ago. When I mentioned some unusual family financial issues, she slid a card across the desk. "Talk to Margaret Fields," she said softly. "Family law, sliding scale, smart as a whip." That Saturday, I walked 6 blocks in the cold to Margaret's office and waited 2 hours to speak with her. I brought copies of every document I'd secretly scanned at the library. She flipped through the files slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You're not imagining this, Mrs. Whitmore, what your daughter did is fraud? With the right filings, we can reverse this. You have rights." I felt tears prick my eyes, not because I was sad, but because someone finally saw me. For weeks, I kept working the library job in silence, scrubbing floors by day, building my case by night. I wasn't just cleaning anymore, I was gathering strength. She thought I was old, powerless, stuck. But the thing about widows, we've already survived the worst day of our lives. What's left is only grit. The storm rolled in just after dusk, thunder, low and growling, like something ancient waking up. Rain lashed against the roof, seeping through the cracked window frame in the attic. I wrapped myself in a quilt, the kind Walter used to call your armor, and lit the little lantern I kept near the cot. I hadn't planned on digging through the old boxes, but the wind wouldn't let me sleep, and grief had a way of keeping my hands busy when my heart ached too loudly. I shuffled to the far end of the attic, where the floor creaked loudest. The corner was stacked with storage bins and yellowed cardboard taped shut with handwriting only Walter used. Summer clothes, tax returns, W's keepsakes. It was in the bottom of one of those beneath an envelope of ration cards and his basic training photos that I found it. A faded manila folder labeled Confidential Walter Whitmore inside. Military documents, an old service medal, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in his blocky print. "Eleanor, if anything ever happens to me, this is yours. Love, W. My hands shook as I opened it. Enclosed were DID papers, notarized and official. Walter had purchased a small cottage property 20 years ago, tucked away in a town called Maple Hollow 2 hours north. A handwritten map was tucked in with it, his notes scribbled in the margins. "Needs new gutters, good bones. Might be a nice place for us when things slow down." My breath caught. He'd never told me. I don't think he ever got the chance. The date on the purchase was right before his last overseas tour. That deployment changed him. He came home quieter, slower. I think he bought that place imagining peace somewhere away from everything. Something just for the two of us. And somehow, Meredith had missed it. I laughed bitterly at first, then truly out loud. Alone in the attic with a storm pounding on the roof, she didn't know this house had been her playground, her power, but this little cottage, this was mine. The next day, I left early under the pretense of going to the market. Instead, I took a bus to Maple Hollow. It was smaller than I imagined. The road leading up to the cottage was overgrown but passable. The house itself was weathered, peeling white paint, cracked windows, shutters hanging by rusted hinges. But the frame stood strong. The porch creaked but didn't break beneath me. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dust. There was no furniture, just old linen curtains, yellowed wallpaper, and a fireplace stained with time. A tiny kitchen with a gas stove. A lofted bedroom under exposed beams. It was beautiful in the way forgotten things are. I stood in the center of the room and whispered, "Hello, Walter." Back at the library, I told Caleb I was working on a little project. He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of project?" "A fixer-upper," I said with a sly smile, to his credit. He didn't press. Over the next few weeks, we struck a quiet rhythm. I worked my shifts and he helped me print order forms, look up DIY tutorials, and even drove me to Maple Hollow on Sundays with a toolbox he inherited from his grandfather. He never asked too many questions, but I could tell he knew I was building more than just a cottage. With each nail, each scrubbed floorboard, each coat of paint, something inside me shifted. I had been shrinking for months, folding myself smaller to survive under Meredith's roof. But here, in this dusty, creaking little cottage, I took up space again. I used my small paycheck for materials, slowly, deliberately. No credit cards, nothing traceable, I cleaned out the chimney myself, refinished the cabinets with Caleb's help. I even picked out curtains blue gingham, like the ones my grandmother used to, so by early spring, the house was livable. Not perfect, but mine. There was one chair on the porch, and I sat in it with a blanket over my knees, watching the breeze rustle through the trees. For the first time in months, I said little. I continued to sleep in the attic, respond to job site requests, clean the kitchen when she wasn't looking. I let her think she'd won. That was her mistake. She'd stolen the house she thought mattered. But the one with my name on it? The one built with my hands? The one filled with my husband's quiet hopes and my newfound strength? That one, she'd never see coming. It happened on a Wednesday morning. The sun was barely up and the attic was still cold from the night. I stood too fast from the Cotno theatrics. No acting, and my legs buckled beneath me. My shoulder clipped. The wooden support beam on the way down. I just lay there for a moment, cheek pressed against the thin rug, eyes on the ceiling joists. Somewhere below, I could hear Meredith's heels clicking toward the front door as she left for a branding retreat. I waited a beat longer, then reached for my phone and dialed 911. The hospital lights were too bright, the linens too stiff. They patched me up, diagnosed me with a mild concussion and a fractured collarbone. They offered to call my daughter. I shook my head. She's busy. I said she wasn't, but I knew she wouldn't come. And I was right. 3 days passed. No calls, no visits. Only a voicemail from Meredith's assistant asking if I could email updates on my discharge status for scheduling purposes. I stared at the phone, then powered it off. That night, I asked the nurse for a pen and a piece of paper. I wrote 3 letters, one to my lawyer, one to the library manager, and one to the gas company in Maple Hollow. The plan had been forming for weeks, but now it had a name. Exit. When they transferred me to a short-term rehabilitation center, I smiled politely, followed their routines, and kept to myself. I told the staff I'd need a little help recovering and arranging new housing. They nodded kindly, assuming I meant assisted living. On the 5th day, I signed myself out. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even take the main road. The bus to Maple Hollow was half empty. I wore a scarf over my head and sunglasses like some fugitive grandmother. My arm was still in a sling, but I carried my paperwork tucked tight under the good one. Walter's deed, the lawyer's filings, my ID and proof of residence for utility transfer. By the time I reached the cottage, the electricity was already on. The mailbox had my name printed neatly on a new label, E. Whitmore. I stepped inside and exhaled. It smelled like fresh paint, lavender, and possibility. I didn't need a mansion. I needed peace. The first week I moved slowly, made tea in the tiny kitchen, let the bruises heal and the silence stretch. Caleb visited twice, once with groceries and once with a toolbox and a sheepish smile. I know you said no more help, he said, but I brought you a porch swing anyway. I let him hang it. When he left, I sat in it with a blanket on my lap and watched the clouds pass without having to explain myself to anyone. Then I mailed the letter, no return address. Just a cream envelope with Meredith scrawled on the front in the same careful cursive I used to sign her permission slips. Inside, Meredith. You called me a burden. You used my grief like a broom, sweeping me into a corner until I disappeared. So, I disappeared. On purpose. But here's the part you didn't plan, for I didn't vanish. I rebuilt. You threw me away. I just made sure you can't find me again. Mom, I pictured her face when she read it. Not because I wanted revenge, not the loud, dramatic kind, but because I wanted her to feel what she made me feel. Unseen. Unnecessary. Forgotten. Back in Maple Hollow, I became someone new. I joined the little quilting circle at the church, donated books to the library, took early morning walks to the diner, where the waitress called me Hun. Without knowing my story, no one there cared who I used to be, or who I used to belong to. They cared that I showed up a few weeks later. I stood at the sink washing a chipped teacup when I realized something. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was living, not just surviving on someone else's terms, not just getting by, but living. In a house I cleaned with my own hands, on land my husband left for me, in a life I carved out from the very bones of abandonment. I wasn't the Eleanor who asked for permission anymore. I was the Eleanor who walked away. And this time I wasn't looking back. It was late spring when the front porch finally smelled like home lavender coffee, and the faint scent of lemon oil from the old floorboards I'd scrubbed by hand. The flowers out front had started to bloom in wild colors, forget-me-nots, snapdragons, and a stubborn patch of violets that had grown through the gravel without anyone asking them to. I liked that about them that morning. I baked to peach and rhubarb just like Walter used to request when guests came by. I wore a soft yellow dress and tied my hair back with a ribbon I hadn't worn in decades. My sling was long gone, and so was the weight on my chest. The house was small, but it had good bones and better people. Caleb arrived first, arms full of folding chairs and a fruit salad he admitted came from the store. I tried, he shrugged. You showed up, I said. That's more than most. Soon after came Clara and June, widows from the church who'd lost their husbands, years apart but found comfort in the same hymns and tea rituals. Then came Thomas, a retired mechanic with Parkinson's, and Alfred, a quiet man who still wore his Navy cap even though no one in town remembered he'd served. They remembered now because I made sure they were seen. We sat around mismatched tables and folding chairs in the yard, laughing over stories and trading old recipes. Caleb played soft jazz on a Bluetooth speaker I still wasn't sure how to use, and for a few hours, time stopped stretching like it used to. I watched from the porch with my cup of sweet tea in hand and thought, Walter would have liked this. He would have carved everyone's names into the railing just to make it official. When the car pulled up, I didn't recognize it at first. Black, sleek, humming like it was too proud to be driving on dirt. But then I saw her. Meredith. She stepped out, heels stabbing the grass, her sunglasses too large for her face. She was holding her phone in one hand, scanning the house like it offended her. My breath didn't catch, my hands didn't shake. I'd imagined this moment too many times to be caught off guard. She didn't knock, just walked up the porch like she still owned something. I had to call 3 different banks to track down this address, she said, taking off her glasses. And I still don't understand how you managed to get this place transferred to your name. I took a sip of tea. Hello to you too, Meredith. She blinked, clearly expecting outrage or gratitude, maybe both. I thought you were in rehab. Then I checked and they said, you'd discharged yourself. No one knew where you were. No, I said calmly. That was the point. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She looked past me at the guests chatting in the yard. Caleb gave her a small wave, but she ignored it. What is this? Some retirement hobby? It's a housewarming, I said. For the home your father left me, the one you never knew about. That's not, she began, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said gently. Don't lie, don't perform. Just take a look. She did. Her gaze lingered on the porch swing, the handmade quilts, the garden bed Caleb and I had built together from salvaged wood. I just don't understand, she muttered. You disappeared. You cut me out. I stood slowly, walked to the railing. Double quotes. No, I said. You cut me out. I just made sure the door stayed closed. She looked stunned. You wanted me gone? I added. Congratulations, I'm gone. Silence stretched between us, thick, uncomfortable, full of everything we'd never said. Then I turned and walked down the porch, steps to refill the sweet tea. I didn't invite her to stay, and she didn't ask that night, after everyone had gone and the sun had dipped low behind the trees. I sat on the porch swing with Caleb beside me. She'll be back, he said. I nodded. Probably, but I won't be. He gave me a sideways glance. I mean, I won't be waiting. I won't be sitting by the window hoping she changes. She might surprise you. She already did, I said. My voice calm once was enough. We watched the stars come out, one by one. Inside, on the mantel, I had placed Walter's photo next to the envelope he'd written me. If anything ever happens to me, this is yours. It wasn't just a house, it was a second chance they had. Called me a burden. So I became a foundation. They had discarded me like clutter, so I built something worth keeping. She came back 2 days later. This time, there was no party, no neighbors laughing in the yard to soften the blow. Just the sound of my porch steps creaking beneath her designer heels and a tap-tap on the screen door. I'd been in the kitchen icing a carrot cake, Walter's favorite. I left the spatula in the bowl and opened the door slowly. Meredith stood there holding a manila folder in one hand, a forced smile in the other. I thought maybe we could talk. Just us. I looked at her for a moment. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her lipstick wasn't quite even. All right, I said and stepped aside. She entered like someone casing a place, eyes flitting from the handmade curtains to the framed military service photo of Walter on the mantel. You fixed it up nicely, she said. I did, I replied, walking to the table. You want tea? She shook her head and sat down. I'll get to the point, she began, smoothing the folder in front of her. Dad never mentioned this property. If it was bought during the marriage, I believe it falls under marital assets. Technically, I raised a hand gently. No, I said, you can't. She blinked. Excuse me, I've spoken to a lawyer, Meredith, several times actually. This house was purchased under Walter's military stipend, titled solely in his name. He designated me as the sole heir to this property in a notarized note 1, written by his own hand, and found in his lockbox. It's legally binding under state law. Her mouth tightened. And I added, reaching for a folder of my own, I have evidence that you forged his signature on the revised pension form. I also have bank records showing you funneled joint account funds into a personal investment portfolio in your name within days of his death. That's embezzlement. And pension fraud. Her jaw dropped just slightly. Do you want to know how I know? I asked. Because you used the same handwriting to sign Walter's name as you. Did your 7th grade permission slips? You always looped the W like a 3. He never did. She looked down at the table. You've been planning this? No, I said. I've been protecting myself. You left me no choice. A beat passed, then another. Her voice, when it came, was smaller. You're going to press charges? I shook my head. No. She looked up, startled. As long as you stay away from me, no contact, no lawyers, no claims. You let me live my life, and I'll let you keep yours. She stared at me still, calculating, trying to find the angle, the same way she had when she cornered me with spreadsheets and ultimatums and said I was no longer entitled to my own home. But there was no angle now, just truth, just boundaries. I didn't mean to hurt you, she muttered, barely audible. I tilted my head. You didn't mean for me to notice? She looked away, blinking hard. I thought, maybe you'd be proud that I was handling things. I would have been, I said softly. Leverage. Silence hung between us like wet laundry. She stood slowly, clutching her folder like a shield. So that's it? That's peace, Meredith, not revenge. Peace, and peace has terms. At the door, she hesitated. You really? Did this all on your own? Not alone, I said, thinking of Caleb, the neighbors, the quiet kindness of people who never asked for explanations, but not with you. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to protest, but then closed it again. She stepped off the porch, didn't look back. Inside, my voice? I hadn't slammed a door. I didn't need to when you've been dismissed. Discarded, erased. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay standing. Later that night, I lit a candle and sat with Walter's photo on the porch. They thought I wouldn't survive without them, I whispered, but I did. Not forgetfulness, just freedom. They'd tried to bury me in silence and shame, but I'd built something louder than both, a life that no longer needed their permission. The easel in the community room creaked a little, but it held steady. I dipped the brush into the sky blue paint and guided the stroke slowly across the canvas left to right. Just like I taught them, don't rush the line. I told Margot, a soft-spoken widow in her 60s who was still afraid to take up space. Let the brush decide how fast to move. She smiled faintly, nodding, and started again. This was her 3rd class. She hadn't said much the first 2, but she never missed a session. The Tuesday art group at Meadowbrook Library had started with just 2 women and a stack of donated watercolors. Now we had 14 regulars, widowers, retirees, even one man whose wife had been in hospice for the past 2 years and said he hadn't held a paintbrush since Vietnam. They didn't come for perfection. They came because someone made room for them, and for once I was that someone. When the session ended, I packed up the brushes while the others folded their easels. One of the younger women, Sonia, tapped me on the shoulder. I signed up for that caregiver advocacy workshop you mentioned, she said shyly. I never thought I'd need something like that. But after my daughter started making comments, she trailed off, embarrassed. I put my hand gently on hers. Needing help doesn't make you weak, I said. Recognizing mistreatment doesn't make you cruel, it makes you awake. She nodded, blinking fast, and I knew she understood back. At the cottage that evening, the porch light flickered on automatically as I climbed the steps. The night air was crisp, scented with lilac and fresh-cut grass. Railing. Inside, the radio played something soft and slow. And above the fireplace, Walter's photo watched over the room, his military medals hanging beside it, and the deed to the cottage now framed beneath the mantel. I reached for the small photo album I kept beside the porch chair and flipped to the page that always stopped me. There we were, Walter and me, barely 20, standing beside a rusted pickup truck with the words "Just Married" scrawled across the back window in shoe polish. His arms around me, my eyes squinting from the sun in joy. I used to think you left me money, I whispered, tracing the edge of his face. But now I know. You left me strength. Strength I hadn't known I possessed. Not when Meredith slammed the door. Not when I lay on the attic floor, dizzy with grief. Not even when I scrubbed floors at the library, wondering if anyone would ever see me again. But strength doesn't come in shouts. It comes in stillness, in waking up each morning and choosing to keep building, even when no one believes you can. The next week, I helped coordinate Meadowbrook's second chapter, Financial Exploitation, or simply the silent loneliness that comes with outliving your usefulness in someone else's eyes. We had booths for legal aid, estate planning, support circles, and small business coaching. Local vendors donated snacks. Caleb organized a book drive, and the church ladies brought enough pie to feed the entire zip code. I stood near the welcome table, wearing a soft blue cardigan and a name tag that simply read, Eleanor, Program Coordinator. People came in slowly at first, tentative, unsure. But by noon, the hall buzzed with chatter and laughter. A woman named Joyce hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You don't know what this means," she said. "I thought I was the only one." That sentence stuck with me. I thought I was the only one. So many of us had been taught that suffering in silence was strength, that shrinking ourselves to keep the peace was love. That being forgotten was just what happened when you got old. Not anymore, toward the end of the event. I stood on the small auditorium stage. Not to give a speech, but simply to say thank you. But before I could even speak, a man in the back raised his hand and said, "No, we need to thank you." The room broke into applause. Not roaring, not theatrical, just real. Like the clapping of people who knew what it meant to be seen again. I smiled, blinking back warmth, and said simply, "This isn't about starting over. It's about starting better." And they nodded. On my porch swing, I let the silence settle around me, not heavy this time, but sacred. The moon hung low, and the stars blinked like they'd been waiting for me to look up. Meredith hadn't reached out again. Of spite, but out of self-preservation, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. There's power in being underestimated. Power in being cast aside, because when they don't see you coming, they never see what you build in the quiet. I took one last sip of tea and looked toward the garden, where violets bloomed wild through the stones. No one planted them, but they came anyway. Thank you for listening to Eleanor's story. If her quiet strength moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more powerful true life stories of resilience, healing, and quiet revenge, only to rise stronger than ever. Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the best comeback isn't loud, it's free.